station, Manx Radio.
This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
Well, the wait is over. The Museum of the Moon has arrived in the Cathedral in Peel, and this amazing art installation will be in place from today until the 2nd of March. The Museum of the Moon is the work of the artist Luke Jerram. Another piece of Luke's work was in St Thomas's Church here in Douglas last year. That was Gaia, and around 13,000 visitors had the chance to see the world, our planet, in a unique way. But where does Luke find his inspiration? Well, who better to tell us than the creator himself? And very shortly we'll hear from Luke Jerram. But first, some music, and what could be more appropriate than Beyond the Moon and Stars.
Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings, so may we come to rest where angels sing. Our eyes have longed to see your loving face, to live within your courts for all our days. Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings, so may we come to rest where angels sing. Upon our darkness, Lord, a light has shone. You chose to dwell with us in flesh and bone. Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings, so may we come to rest where angels sing. When life's great journey ends and day is done, then may our eyes behold your Holy One. Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so
Beyond the Moon and Stars, sung by the man who wrote it, composer and worship leader Dan Shute. A little later in the programme, I'm going to be talking with Rev'd Alex Brown, who's got a particular part to play in the Museum of the Moon. But before that, let's hear from the man who created the Museum of the Moon. He's artist Luke Jerram, and it's a very obvious question, but one I'm sure that we'd all like to ask. What gave you the idea, the inspiration to create this piece of art?
The idea for the Museum of the Moon came from living in Bristol. And here we have the world's second highest tidal range. There's a 13 metre, what's that? It's about 30 or 35 foot and 40 foot gap between high tide and low tide. So I was cycling to work every day over the river and noticing this huge tidal variation. And of course, it's the moon that's making that happen, as well as the geography of the land. And so, that was sort of 15 years ago. I had this idea to create this replica moon. But back then, of course, the data wasn't available, and nor was the printing technology. So it's taken 15 years to be able to kind of finally create this artwork.
It's amazing to think, Luke, that you had the idea, but none of the technology existed. Now, that really is creativity, isn't it? To imagine something that you can't actually do. So, Luke, how would you describe the artwork?
The artwork consists of a sculpture of the moon. It's 500,000 times smaller than the real thing. And it's created from high-resolution NASA imagery. So every valley and mountain and crater is defined in perfect detail. And it's a sphere. It's a 23-foot diameter sphere, just with a light inside. But it creates this illusion of texture. So in a darkened space, the public, when they first see the artwork, they're amazed by it. People ask me, how did you get it in the building? Because it doesn't look like a balloon, whereas actually it is just a balloon. When people ask me if it's made of fiberglass or if it's made of concrete, because there is this sort of illusion that's created. And this replica moon allows the public to see the moon in every last detail, but also go around the far side of the moon and see the dark side as well. The moon we see from Earth only faces one direction, so we only ever get to see the front side of the moon, the with these darker patches. And it was only in 1959 that the Soviets sent a satellite around the far side of the moon, and the public were able to sort of see what that looked like. So people are very excited to be able to see the artwork up close and have their own sort of close encounter. The reason I made this artwork was because I'm passionate about both the science of the moon and astronomy, but also I'm interested in the art of the moon as well. Humanity has been staring at the moon for 200,000 years. It's always been a destination for humanity, somewhere to aspire to visit one day. And the moon has inspired so much literature and music and mythology in every culture right around the world. And so I've created this replica and I'm touring it around the world as a way of kind of collecting those ideas and those stories and those different beliefs. And that's why I'm calling it the Museum of the Moon, this idea of kind of collecting a sort of human understanding and relationship that we have with the moon.
This is something very different. It's not a conventional artwork. So, Luke, how popular has it been so far?
We've had more than 100 exhibitions in 30 different countries right around the world, from India to America, from Hong Kong to Australia. I mean, it's been really surprising. And over 3.5 million people have experienced and seen this artwork as it's been touring. So it's been a great success. The artwork is being presented in different contexts. So if I take the artwork to China, people instantly think about the moon in relation to their Mid-Autumn festival. The moon has a great sort of spiritual significance in their culture. Whereas if I take the moon to America, people instantly think about the Apollo moon mission. So there's different interpretations around the world. And again, if I put the artwork in a science museum, people think about the artwork quite scientifically, whereas if I put it in a cathedral or a church, people will then think about the moon perhaps in relation to God and the creation of the universe perhaps. And again, we put the moon in swimming pools, so you can swim out underneath the moon, and that's very beautiful as well. So depending on where it goes in the world and the context and how it's presented, the interpretation shifts. The artwork comes with a composition, a surround sound composition by a composer called Dan Jones, who I've worked with for many years. And he's won a BAFTA and a couple of Ivor Novello awards as well. And for me, the music is a way of connecting the sculpture with the architecture of the space. So the music can help kind of create an installation, it can help fill the space and create an atmosphere for the interpretation of the sculpture.
Another unique feature of this art installation is that it's not a static object to be looked at and left. There's more to it, Luke, isn't there?
The artwork is both this sculpture and installation for the public to experience, but it's also a venue for events to take place. So wherever the moon has gone, there's been a whole host of lunar-inspired events taking place beneath the moon. So we've had opera in Italy, and we've had film nights and astronomy lectures and choirs and cheese and wine events. So in that way, the artwork leaves space for other people to be creative, and within my practice, that's quite important.
Luke, I'm absolutely sure that everyone who sees the Museum of the Moon reacts differently. Can you tell us any reactions that have particularly affected you?
The response is really interesting. We launched the artwork recently at the Natural History Museum, and this guy came up to me and he was all sort of in tears and emotional. And it turns out he was an astronomer working for the European Space Agency, and he'd spent his entire life studying the surface of the moon, and he became all emotional and he needed a hug. So I had to give him a hug, and that seemed to sort him out. That was great. And just last year, this little girl came up to me and she said, "Will you put the moon back afterwards?" So she thought I'd stolen the real moon. So I had to definitely reassure her that I would definitely put the moon back afterwards.
I was talking there with artist Luke Jerram, creator of Gaia, the earth that we saw in St Thomas's Church here in Douglas last year, and whose art installation, The Museum of the Moon, is in the cathedral now. And just as Luke described, in the coming weeks there'll be a great variety of planned events, including concerts, talks and special activities for children, all under the moon. But there'll also be lots of time for you to just walk in and experience the Museum of the Moon in your own way, a space and a place for everyone. There's a leaflet in the cathedral with all the event details and a Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com and search for Museum of the Moon in Peel, and the page will be kept up to date with as much information as possible to help you to make the most of your visit. Rev'd Alex Brown is a priest in the Church of England. He's based in Douglas and is a pioneer minister, meaning that his work is outside rather than inside a church building. Alex supports people who want to explore or deepen their Christian faith but don't feel drawn to traditional churches. It's Alex's calling to draw them into small communities and help them find new ways of doing and being church together. And Alex has a one-man show that he'll be performing in the cathedral later this month. It's called Luke Under the Moon, and Alex joins me now to tell us all about it. Alex, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Now, first of all, you, like me, went to see Gaia in St Thomas's last year. How did that touch you, Alex?
Oh, it was amazing. I got an 8-year-old daughter. I asked school if I could take her because her school wasn't going. So we took her out of school on that Friday and she came down and it was just jaw-dropping. Both of us stood under this enormous representation of the planet that we stand on. And we've seen it on globes and on maps, but when you see it and it's actually there, the amount of water that is on the earth and how high up the Isle of Man is that you couldn't even see it over the edge, and just this feeling of how small we are and how big the earth is and yet how tiny and fragile it all is. And so we also got our Pioneer Church. We asked Liz, who was in charge of the timetable at St Thomas's, is there a time that we can bring all of our families down? And she said yes. So we got this exclusive use of the premises after they'd shut it down to everyone else. And our church guys, just all of the families there was about 11 different families. We all stood underneath it. We played some worship tracks. And then afterwards we asked the kids, what's this made you think about? They said things like, we need to stop fighting each other. We need to stop polluting the earth. We need to be kinder to each other. Look how amazing it is. And all just as a response to seeing it.
Looking at Gaia, to me it said, there are no boundaries. We are just one big place, some land, some water, and all these boundaries are artificial. They're not meant to be there. We are all one.
Yeah, and there's a biblical principle that what we see in creation is set up to show us who God is as well. That's like we can understand so much of who God is by looking at what he's created, how he's created it, the diversity that he's poured out into it, how he loves infinite variety and loves colour and change. And you can see all of that when we were stood underneath it. It was just quite jaw-dropping. And I'm so excited to see the moon, Judith. I really am.
But you, Alex, are actually doing another of your one-man shows. It's a while since you've done these, but what you've done before is presented one of the Gospels. So you have taken everything that's in the Gospel, but delivered it faithfully, but in your own style. And the one that you're going to be doing under the moon is the Gospel of Luke. Now, before we talk about that in more detail, we've got the Bible that is not one book. It's a collection of books written by different people at different times for different purposes, often with great intervals of time in between. Why, Alex, is the Bible important?
I think partly the reason the Bible is so important is it really does express who humanity is, who we're designed to be in the first place, and how we get things epically wrong all the time. You just need to look at my life, and there's an example. But you need to look at the news, and look at the news today, and read the newspaper, watch the news on the television. All the stuff that's happening around the world that is stuff that we do want and don't want to happen is all reflected in the Bible. It's like humanity hasn't changed for the generations and generations that we've been around. And the Bible deals with a whole load of stuff. People say to me, I struggle with the Old Testament because of the amount of war that's in there. I'm like, have you seen the news? It's like, what do you think is different about what's happening now? There's so much love and sacrifice, and the characters in the Bible are all flawed, and God uses them anyway. So as a human myself, I read through the Bible and I can see my story in there. And I think that's true of everyone who genuinely encounters the Bible and reads through it. We can see ourselves in it. The bits we don't like about ourselves are in there just as much as the bits that we do like about ourselves. And it's how God is interacting with that and how he's weaving through his story all the way through.
Probably the best known 4 books in the Bible are the Gospels, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. But whilst they all seem to be telling the story of the birth of Jesus, his life, his death and his rising to life again, they're each written from a different viewpoint, aren't they, Alex?
It's like what God wanted to do was show from 4 different perspectives who Jesus is and how he interacts with humanity. So even though there's a lot of shared material, particularly with Matthew, Mark and Luke, John kind of does his own thing, but Matthew, Mark and Luke have got a lot of shared material. But in preparation for Luke's gospel, I researched how much of Luke's gospel is only in Luke's gospel, and it's about a third of it. I hadn't realised that extent of stuff that's only there in Luke. The angel appearing to Mary. Then when Jesus is 8 days old, they go into the temple as Simeon and Anna. Then Jesus gets lost as a teenager. All of that is only in Luke.
Remind us, Alex, what have you already done as a one-man show?
So I started off with doing Mark's gospel. That's easy because the whole thing, you read it start to finish, it does last 90 minutes. So after I'd done Mark's gospel for 1 year, then I did Luke the year after, and kind of that actually Luke's gospel, the whole thing is about 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is way too long. So I had to cut that back to 90 minutes. And then I did Matthew's gospel the year after that, and then I did John's gospel the year after that. It was during the time when I was doing my training to be an ordained minister, and I was complaining to God that I didn't have enough Jesus in my curriculum, and he said, well, do something about it then, which I wasn't expecting him to say. So that's what I did over those 4 years, and it really formed me and formed my view of Jesus. And I have to say, Judith, that Luke was my least favourite one to do, because he has put so much into it. To perform it feels bitty. So when I was asked to do this one, Underneath the Moon, I thought, okay, I'm going to revisit Luke, because what I really need to do is get over my dislike of Luke's gospel, and it's worked. I've got it down to 80 minutes, and almost all of it is only the stuff that's in Luke's gospel, apart from some key things that everyone has. But going through it again and deciding what to put in, what to leave, was so difficult. And Luke's agenda of inclusion and looking out for the poor and helping people, and of God's power being at work. Jesus' heart is breaking in Luke's gospel, not just for individuals, but for systems. So if, for instance, as he's going down the hill into Jerusalem, where we know he's going to be received well and then not received well, he is weeping over Jerusalem. And he's saying, I longed for this moment, but even now you can't see who I am. And he's really, really harsh with the Pharisees in Luke's gospel as well. We live in an age, I think, where it's difficult to speak truth to power, where power structures, some key figures in our world at the moment are making key mistakes. And Luke's Jesus would literally have walked up to them and said, this is what it should be like, and this is what you're doing. And then he got crucified for it. And we need to have that same courage. That's the Jesus that Luke shows us. This real fighter for people, fighter for justice, fighter for truth. And then he goes to the cross. But he's also super, super compassionate. Like there's stories in Luke that you don't get anywhere else of Jesus being so kind to people, him completely restoring people's dignity and their worth. Even how Judas is treated in Luke's gospel is so different to the others. Luke refers to Satan entering Judas to kind of get him off the hook slightly. And even in Gethsemane, Judas comes over to give Jesus the kiss of betrayal. And in Luke's gospel, Jesus stops him before he even gets there and says, I can't believe you're going to betray me with a kiss, but he doesn't get to do it. This is very, very interesting.
Did you choose Luke because you feel that it's got the most to say to us at this moment?
I think God may have had a hand in that. I literally chose Luke because it was my least favourite and I wanted to fall back in love with it. And that's definitely worked for me. But I do think that at the place that we are as a world at the moment, thinking about things that are happening overseas, possibly, things that are happening nearer to us. I'm a member of the Church of England. There are things happening in the Church of England at the moment with different leaders which are very difficult to understand and grapple with. And Luke's message is that we need to be firm in our belief, and we need to be firm in what is good and what is right and stand up for what is right. And we need to be part of God's transformation of the world, sometimes with individuals and sometimes with systems. And I think it's very timely to do Luke's gospel. Part of the amazing message of the gospel itself is that God doesn't stand apart from all of our mess and say, look at you, aren't you awful? He comes and immerses himself, literally born as a human, to walk with us through it all. And when he's addressing the Jewish leaders and saying these things are wrong, he's doing it as a Jewish male. So he's put himself into the system to transform it. And I think often we forget that. We think that if we're going to change something, I'm not going to be a part of it, so I'll just walk away. And that's sometimes you have to do that. Other times, to change it, you have to be part of it. And I think that all of us who are part of any system have got a mandate to not just live in a system, but to transform it into what it could be.
You've performed the other Gospels over a period of time in very different places. This is a unique location. Do you think the whole setting is going to make you feel different about the way you deliver this?
So when Rosemary Clark from the Cathedral asked me to do it, instantly my thought was, okay, how am I going to do this? Where shall I perform it? So I'm going to be right underneath the moon, and it's going to be set in the round. So everyone's going to be sat right around the edge. So everyone will be able to see both me and the moon. No one's have to look up. It's going to be right there as part of it. And I think it's going to be really quite an emotional thing, because the intense beauty of this thing that we look at so often. You know, I love the moon. It's just amazing. It's fascinating. It's just out of reach, and yet someone stood on it. You know, it's just this amazing place. And for us to be there with this huge part, this mysterious part of God's creation, hanging silently there, as if God himself is hovering over the whole thing. I think it will have this spiritual and practical kind of hybrid thing going on. It's a real privilege to have been asked to do anything at this Museum of the Moon, and I'm very, very looking forward to it.
Can I just ask you, Alex, about the language? You obviously will have studied different translations of Luke's Gospel, but how do you work out the style of it?
What I've done is I've based it around one particular translation, which is the New Living Translation. But as you say, because I've read Luke's Gospel in multiple translations and studied things, I know that there's certain translations which say things better than others. So I've rephrased things, and because I'm not telling the whole of Luke's Gospel, so no one's going to turn up thinking they're getting a word-for-word translation of Luke's Gospel, I hope, I've been able to actually put more storytelling phrases into it. So it won't feel like you're listening to scripture. It will feel like you're hearing story after story after story, hopefully well told, with a soundscape in the background. So I've got music. There's a music bed that goes all the way through, and there's sound effects as well. So when there's an angry crowd, you can hear an angry crowd. When they're on the boat, you can hear water lapping. When there's a storm, there's a storm. So it will kind of immerse people in this world.
And it is a completely free event. So it's happening on a Sunday evening, Sunday the 23rd of February. It's a 7:30 start on the Sunday evening. Whilst it is completely free, you're encouraging people to pick up a free ticket on Eventbrite, aren't you? Just so you've got an idea of numbers.
Yes, I am. Rosemary said if I do it in the round, we can probably fit 200 people in. So it's only been on Eventbrite a few days, and we've already sold a third of our tickets. So if you do want to come, just go onto Eventbrite and search Luke Under the Moon.
Rev'd Alex Brown, thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning. And we'll see you under the moon.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Well, Friday is Valentine's Day, and I thought I'd get ahead of the curve and send you a card with a message about real life love, delivered straight to you now, wherever you are. Russ Bravo is all in favour of a love that's truly out of this world. Some wonderful couples in long marriages share their secrets of success, and my electronic card is in an envelope of music written by Graham Kendrick. Happy Valentine's Day.
A little bit of love goes a long, long way. A little love, a little love, a little bit of love, and I'm on my way. A little love, a little love. A long way, but we'll get there together. A long way, but we'll get there soon. Along the way, we can lean on each other. A little love goes a long, long way.
Wasn't it Shakespeare who said, "Love is a many splendid thing"? And we all went, "Yes, love, many splendours," that kind of thing, without really having a clue what he was on about. Because it's quite hard to analyse. Love is. I remember as a teenager going weak at the knees following a disco, where the conversation between me and the young lady I was keen on consisted mainly of the words yes, no, sometimes, and what? We'd swapped addresses and I'd written her a letter. Yes, a letter. As I recall, I offered to lend her my ELO album, and she wrote back to say she already had a boyfriend with a car and parents with a villa in Spain. Valentine's Day always used to be an occasion for much hilarity. I'm convinced my friends always used to invent mythical girlfriends and send themselves cards. I tended to mess things up a bit by getting the girl's address wrong or sending a card with my name on it rather than "from your mysterious admirer" or something cool and intriguing. At the end of the day, we all want to know we're loved, and to be able to give love too. The good thing is that whatever the state of your relationships, whether romance is alive and well or sat shivering and coughing in a corner, we are all loved by God. He accepts us as we are and offers us a fresh start, no matter how much of a fool we've been in the past. Jesus may have been betrayed with a kiss, but he's never stopped loving us.
He has some funny little ways. I'm tolerant, but that makes it more interesting, doesn't it? I took him for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, and that's what I've tried to do.
I try to show my love for my wife just by obeying her instantly. She might give me a kiss now and then, and we might laugh a bit.
Well, he doesn't make a fuss about little things. He's got a great phrase that his mother gave him. She used to say, "Never make a first-class row over a second-class matter."
I always have the last word, even if it's only "yes, dear."
Along the way, we can lean on each other. A little love goes a long, long way. A long way, but we'll get there together. A long way, but we'll get there soon. Along the way, we can lean on each other. A little love goes a long, long way. A little love, a little love, a little love.
And now let's take a look at our notice board. And there are 2 bilingual Manx English services celebrating the coming of spring and reflecting on St Bridget and the theme of hospitality. The first one is this afternoon at 2:30 in Bigarrow Methodist Chapel, just outside Kirkmichael. There'll be a chance to make St Bridget's crosses, and there'll be solo singing from Ruth Keggin-Gell and Brisha Harkin. The second of the bilingual Manx English services is next Sunday evening, the 16th. It's at 6:30 in Ballabeg Methodist Chapel. That service will include music and poetry from Krista McCartney and Annie Kissack and friends. Both the services will be led by Reverend Dr. Janet Corlett, and both will be followed by hearty refreshments, and there's a warm welcome for all. This afternoon at 3:00 in Kirkmaloo, you're invited to a short celebration of Candlemas. Reverend Ruth Walker says we're celebrating the restoration of a beautiful stained glass window which depicts this festival, and we're delighted to welcome Manx dancers Perry Bain to help us celebrate. That's in Maloo Parish Church this afternoon at 3:00. This evening at 6:30, the Mariners Choir will be in Ballagary Chapel and the preacher will be Mrs. Pauline Corlett. And as usual, the service will be followed by supper and community hymn singing. And that's all that we've time for now, but I'll be back tonight at 9, waiting to open the door to our virtual lounge and welcome you in for a mix of all kinds of music, plus your requests and dedications. And I'd love you to join me if you can. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a blessed and happy week, and a very good morning.
The Nation Station, Manx